Thank you very much all for coming here tonight. I'm Kristalia Kanvasinou. I'm a senior lecturer in planning, urban design, and architecture. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah. And I'm also the co-convener of the Emerging Territories Research Group, one of 5 research groups of the School of Architecture and Cities, bringing together colleagues from planning, urban design, and architecture. And we are co-hosting this event together with Urban Design Group, who are a membership organization advocating for raising urban design standards towards improving the quality of life in our cities, towns, and villages. Before I say a little bit more about the event, I'd like to mention a few words of housekeeping. In the unlikely event of the fire alarm going off, please return to the ground floor through the stairway. And there will be fire marshals there who will guide you out of the building, and you will be accounted for. So I'm very pleased to introduce this, to invite you to celebrate with me the launch of Research Handbook on Urban Design, edited by Marion Roberts and Susie Nelson. Marion and Susie are long-standing colleagues at the University of Westminster and long-standing members of the profession. They have been teaching in our courses on urban design, planning, and regeneration for many years. And they've also been conducting high-quality research for over 3 decades. And I think this book is a testimony to their expertise and their global reach in the way that it brings together researchers from all over the globe. And it's quite remarkable in its interdisciplinarity and international scope. So I'd like to now invite Marion and Susie to tell us a little bit more about the contents of the book, its contributors, and its scope. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Kristalia, and thank you again, everybody who's taken the time to come here. I'm just going to talk for about 5 minutes about the book, so it'll be a quick whiz through. Its origin actually came from the publisher who approached me in 2019. And once I'd signed the contract, I thought, wow, I'm never going to get it done without a collaborator. And so I was very pleased when my long-standing friend and colleague, Susie Nelson, agreed to co-edit it with me. So to explain a little bit more about the book itself, it's aimed at graduates. It's a research handbook. So it's aimed at research, graduate students, early researchers, established researchers, and practitioners. Elgar suggested a mixture of, I should have moved on, of case studies and literature reviews. And they were very happy because we wanted an international approach. And so we put a lot of time in trying to find contributors from each region in the world. The publishers also suggested drawing on established and emergent researchers, which we were very happy to do. And we were very keen in a way to concentrate on urban design as a spatial discipline. And, because urban design is a very broad subject, probably we might talk about interdisciplinarity, but the spatial focus seemed really important. And for that reason, we were very keen on having high quality illustrations throughout the book, and also making sure that we had color plates, and we pushed it to the limit as far as getting as many color plates as the publisher would allow us. Then hunting for contributors wasn't easy, but we're delighted with all the ones who have contributed, and we hope that you will recognise some names amongst them and also support the newly emergent ones. Oh dear, I'm sorry, it's not moving. Sorry. Should be another next slide. And then the one after that. Yes, here we are. So we realized as the chapters came in that we needed a special section on different approaches to urban design. So we start with this, and this section covers from the kind of high theory of Sandig and Ayu, and Ellick and Kim will be talking about their development of socio-spatial mapping, which I think is unique to urban design. Urban design teaching also does have a relationship to practice, to research, and that's discussed in Black and Mel's chapter. And then finally, there's a practitioner research chapter from Jason Pomeroy and Denise Lim. So these are kind of different approaches into research. Following that, the book is organized on spatial scales, starting at settlements. And Hassam and Jan will be talking about their chapters quite soon. But our international research extended to India, and we were pleased to include Shruti's chapter on master planning in Rajasthan. And as some of you might know, I have a particular research interest in the urban night. So we have included a literature review, and was very pleased to include a chapter from what I think will be an emergent topic of artificial lighting that is becoming increasingly important. Neighbourhoods are critical in urban design, and there is much research. So Emily Tarland's chapter provides a wonderful introduction for new researchers. And then there's so many themes in neighbourhoods, with Tim Townsend writing about health, Tim Heath about China and the revitalization in Shenzhen. And then, of course, we discuss walkability and transport issues in relationship to neighbourhoods, with Carrie's and Anders' chapter on transport nodes and the difficulties in Chile of trying to get people out of their cars. Public space is very much the bread and butter of urban design. And Vikas provides a wonderful overview, which I hope will really set new researchers onto the right paths. Quentin is probably well known to many of you, and with his work on memorials, and it's great to reach out to have a chapter on Taiwan. And Doris will be talking about her chapter soon. Then we move to South Africa, and Karina writes about her new concept of regenerative space, which goes beyond resilience and sustainability. Crystalia will talk about her chapter later, and the Marusics, who come from a different intellectual tradition, I think, in urban design, that's more numerical, bringing and a much more rigorous evaluation assessment of public space. So as you can see, the book covers many places, many themes, and many different approaches to the topic. I think we'll be able to talk more in the questions and answers about how some of the themes are interlinked. And we'll also be able to maybe comment on some of the things that we wanted to include but weren't able to. and we'll welcome questions on that. And so now, no further ado, I'd like to move on to introducing Doris Damjanovic. Doris is a landscape planner. She's currently vice rector of there she is, there's Doris, poised to come online. She's vice rector at Boku, which is the University of Natural Resources, and in Vienna. And Doris and I have worked together for many years on different aspects of gender, but in her presentation, Doris will be talking about Vienna and cool cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion, for the introduction, and I will share the presentation.
Yeah, we can see it, Doris.
Okay, good. Sorry, takes always a while. Good. Then, greetings from Vienna. So, as Marion mentioned, I'm landscape planner from the background, and I bring a presentation from the city of Vienna, working the last years also on cool public spaces for the city, or cool streets, climate fit approach to the urban design of public streetscapes and squares, a virtual contribution to climate responsive city. And one important thing is, especially the last years, when we have the challenge of climate change in urban design, there, especially also in Vienna, but also Central Europe, but I think all over Europe, we have the challenges of climate change, like especially in the city, we have the increase of temperature, especially in the summertime. But it can be also very dry. And the other one hand, like we have the heavy rainfall. So these are the big challenges when we talk about climate change. So like when you see, maybe some of you know the city of Vienna. So it's a big aerial photograph. Here's the Danube, and you can see all the red color on this picture, and especially the streets, and also all the squares are getting very hot in the summertime because a lot of these areas are paved. So there's a big city planning or urban planning going on to green the city and to make them more livable. So one big issue is really to get urban green and blue infrastructure in urban design. And this project, what we have in our contribution in the book, is about the public spaces. It was a very applied research project, so not so theoretical, but it was really an empirical research of around 25 public spaces where we looked very close to the spatial design and what could be a big contribution to make them greener. And we identified 5 elements which are very important to green or up the city. That was the vegetation elements like trees, shrubs, tree pits. It was the rainwater management, especially important thing, the water elements, surface materials, shading elements. So one big result from this research, but for all what we do in our research on public spaces, is that it's very important for cooling down the city that we think about urban green and clean blue infrastructure as a contribution to urban design and to make climate responsive urban spaces. Why do we want to do that? Urban green infrastructure, and this is coming more from landscape ecology, they have a lot of ecosystem functions in the city. And 2 main things what have the green and blue infrastructure is, one, the regulating service. So especially the trees, for example, are very important for regulating and social cultural services. And it helps a lot what we can see when we are doing new photographs, that the trees have a big influence on the streets, but also all over the city. And the cooling down is one thing, but it's also kind of air filtration capacity of the trees, for example. The other thing is important for the storm water management. That's also, Vienna is quite dry, but still we have quite heavy rainfall. So it's very important also to design the public spaces into streets that they can support the stormwater management. And another thing is also, this is more kind of cultural services. is that it's also good to have green or blue elements in urban areas, also that the people feel they have a good feeling in the city. It helps, it's kind of it supports the mental and physical health. So the urban green infrastructure have on one hand the ecosystem services, but also the society benefits on ecological, social, and economic ways. So it's very important to support urban livability and the quality of life in the city. And in our contribution, we really explained 2 examples. We had quite a lot of examples, but these are 2 main and important ones. One is very, some of you maybe know Vienna, it's a very dense medieval city. So a lot of, especially the inner city is very dense. So there's not a lot of possibility to unpave or to get in a lot of things. So very important is the tree planting. And this is a very thing which was really funded in the last years and has the big impact on this topic. And here we have one example that's in the inner city in the 7th district, where they did, you can see that the trees are quite new, that they really tried to green the city and also to make this kind of mist pillars. So it helps also, that's not really have an influence on the microclimate, but it's for the feeling of the people. They have the water and the kids playing with the water. So this is also very important. Another thing is, another example, it's also in our contribution, is a square. This is very typical also for our urban layout, this kind of squares. And for this, it was very important to green the square, but also to think a lot. What you see on the left side here is a kind of a sponge city principle for the trees. The trees especially have a big stress in the summertime. So it's very important that they have enough water. So they have developed kind of a special sponge city principle for the trees. You can see that there's a special material where the trees get planted in, and having some soil filters and pipes, and also that there's more room for the trees in the streets, but also in the squares. I mean, you can have a look on the picture. It's very important also to have no dark pavement, to use a lot of water, to green the city. So this is important elements to for cooling down public space. The basis for the whole study, you can also read in the contribution, it's a long research. What does how can green and blue infrastructure support a climate responsive city? What's important, and this again, it's some results have been more practical ones, and some are more for the research. So the practical opportunities say that there's really the possibilities with the streets, or to greening the streets and the public spaces is very important to support climate issue and make the city more livable. Another thing what we can see is what we really tried also to look on the planning instruments, and especially the city of Vienna, but also other cities have kind of funding schemes that can really implement not only the idea of green and blue infrastructure, but they have also the money to do this and have the resource to do it. And to sum it up, what was also important in the whole research is that we had a lot of workshops, but also kind of focus groups with the experts which are doing the implementation, because on one hand, we have this idea, there are these scientific ideas, what has a good influence on climate resilient squares and streetscapes, but there's a lot of kind of constraints when you do it really in practical side, or the legal framework is not that easy. Some parts are public, some parts are private things. So this was very important also to think how we can implement it in the everyday life of the practitioners, and how they can really implement our ideas. And to sum it up in our contribution, I think to design cool public spaces, it's very important to have a holistic planning approach. this is very important, really, to think not only about the different elements, but to think how you do, what's the legal framework, who are the people involved when you implement these ideas, and also what kind of elements are really appropriate for the different cases. And yeah, thank you for your attention. And this was a very short insight about the cool public spaces in the city of Vienna.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Doris, again.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you anymore.
Yeah, I'm Susie Nelson, the other editor of the book. I'm now going to introduce the next speaker, who was going to be with us in person, but has had a medical problem that's meant he couldn't come in person. It's Jan Woestra. He is going to carry on the theme of trees, and he's based at the University of Sheffield. I've lost my notes. Where he is a reader in landscape history and theory. He originally trained in landscape and arboriculture in the Netherlands. And prior to joining the Department of Landscape Architecture at the University of Sheffield, he worked in private practice with much tree-related business. So over to you, Jan.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'll share my. Could you just leave, Doris, and then I can share. Oh,
Okay.
I can do it without you, I think. Oh yeah.
There is.
There it is. Yes. Yeah. So hopefully this works.
Yeah, we can see right here. Yeah, excellent.
Great. Okay. So this follows on from Doris's account, which emphasized the ecosystem services to the city, and the various sort of political and technical issues relating to getting cool cities. I'm looking at it in a slightly different way, and in the way that trees have always been considered as part of our healthy, health-making cities. So health and well-being have always stood in forward. The example I'm giving here is in the Nieuwe Gracht in Utrecht, where in 1660 there was an issue that in the Netherlands people were allowed to plant their trees at the end of the property on the public road. But this also meant that there were trees of different sizes, different proportions. And by the 1660s, that was a little bit of an issue. It had also been observed by people like John Evelyn when he came to visit Amsterdam, which he called a city in a wood. Trees were everywhere, and they were to the benefit of the people living next to it. They had the right to plant trees in the public domain, on the public street. But by that stage, there was also the issue of being able to make an impact, to sell property, to provide main routes. And the slide which I'm showing you here is one of these roads that was planned through the dunes from The Hague to Scheveningen, the harbor town, which was supposed to be the starting point of a new sort of area of development for the city, and in fact it did become so over the years. It was planted with 8 rows of trees, and was a very important statement for the city and an approach to the city, or the town as it was. It never had city rights, it was a town. So this was also the case in Paris, where we had the creation of all these boulevards. And the emphasis here was on creating spaces for the people. The open air saloon is the term that is used there in order to describe the intention of the designers. The necessity was there. It was for the health and well-being, for reducing dust, providing oxygen. All these things were sort of iterated by the landscape architect involved for the development. And similar developments took place in the ring road of Vienna, linking back to that. But by the 1890s, the landscape architecture became a major theme and were sort of connective. And the important issue here was providing sort of walks, public walks for citizens. This had been an issue from medieval Europe onwards, throughout Europe. And this was promoted here as the notion of the park system by Frederick Law Olmsted. And it was imported back and used and reused in various ways. The general development plan for Amsterdam includes a park system, but it also takes it a bit further. The architect in charge, the chairman of the CIAM, the International Congress of Modern Architecture, Cor van Eesteren, together with various architects and landscape architects, developed the theme of the Western garden cities to the city, which you see the plan is on the general plan is on the left, and here we see a part on the right hand side. We see a part that in fact should have been on the left, but which includes this a lake, and you see all the green spaces that utilize the natural conditions of the site, but also the emphasis here was on creating various types of spaces, not only for health and well-being, but also to provide a spatial experience, progression through the site, which had become such a main issue in the design since the invention of the park system. And that we also see in modern town planning in the Netherlands. When you go to further detail, a number of landscape architects really developed this, and this has been studied in recent years and has been referred to as the language of trees, which is somewhat ironical that at the same time this language of trees was also reinvented by others looking at the more technical aspects of trees or the ecosystem services. But that was done in various ways, and this developed in the Netherlands as tree structure plans. One of the earliest cities to do this was Zwolle, where the park system, initially the tree planting structure was going to emphasize the historic structure of the city. So communicating that as well as articulating, and then that's the term that was used, the main spaces. But since the early 1990s and particularly in the 2000s, this has developed more in sort of green space patterns, or the Groene Mal, as it is called here for Apeldoorn. And this links into the pan-European ecological system, where the emphasis is on getting nature into the city. And once you've got the argument from health and well-being, and then you can start arguing for funding, as Apeldoorn has done, arguing that this is a necessity from the point of transitioning to provide a healthy climate. So, but that doesn't only have to be from the technical aspects, the ecosystem services, but it can also be from the spatial, the providing of spaces for people and creating spaces that can be used. So this is what is being articulated in my chapter, and sort of gives an account of some of the main developments as having taken place, particularly in the Netherlands, which I've emphasized here in my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. That was very interesting. I'm now going to pass over to Crystalia, who's going to talk about her chapter.
Thank you. And first of all, I'd like to thank Marion and Susie for inviting me to contribute to this book among so many prominent and emergent scholars in urban design research. So my chapter, let's bring it up on the screen. Keep talking, okay. It's always a good idea to have a plan B in case there are no visual aids. Okay, so my chapter is called Crisis and Temporary Public Spaces, Lessons from London, UK, and there it is. And it provides some critical insights on how urban design can learn from temporary interventions to respond creatively and pragmatically to longer-term conditions of uncertainty and rapid change. Temporary initiatives in urbanism tend to emerge in periods of crisis. And by crisis here, two examples from the recent past can be the global financial crisis of 2008 and the more recent COVID-19 public health emergency. And they emerge in those periods of crisis because there's usually more leeway and tolerance towards experimenting with doing things differently. So in this chapter, the way I define temporary public spaces is I'm talking about temporary public spaces produced on privately owned land or, okay, yeah, or temporary public space adaptations or temporary adaptations of existing public space, such as, for example, streets. So in the first section, I look into a historical overview of the post-World War II years, charting sort of countercultural and urban ecology projects on abandoned urban spaces, which were usually led by community-based art collectives in response to housing deprivation, the decline of industry and high rates of unemployment and the oil and energy crisis in the 60s and 70s. And I also look at how this over time moved from being bottom-up and semi-legal and guerrilla initiatives to becoming more legalized, formalized and adopted by local authorities. And then I need to move slide. Where do I point? Thank you. So if you look at this map, this brings together the sort of the clustering of temporary initiatives that I'm reviewing in the chapter over time. And as you can see, some of them have managed to become permanent and endure, as you can tell probably from the dates in this list, 2008 to present, 2009 to present. So it's quite interesting how these temporary initiatives eventually become part of the permanent legacy and part of the fabric of cities. Can we move to the next slide? Thank you. Then I move on to look into the 2008 global financial crisis and explore 5 case studies from London, which were part of research funded by the Liverpool Trust between 2012 and 2015. Which was under the title Interim Spaces, Creative and Creative Use. And some of them are still ongoing, but some have moved and some have ended. So the trajectories of temporary public spaces are quite different. The other thing the thing that was interesting about that period was that, in contrast to the historical case studies that I explored in the 60s and 70s, these ones had much more top-down involvement or collaboration between local authorities and developers with community and third sector organizations, usually under a meanwhile lease, not least because some of them were on privately owned and temporarily available land, vacant land. So that's something that I think these projects are where urban design can learn from in terms of creative adaptation or reuse of vacant land towards promoting equity, sustainability, co-creation, and community well-being. And I contrast these projects with a more commercial turn in temporary uses during the 2010s mostly, when the so-called pop-ups became developers' marketing tools. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the second period I discuss is the COVID-19 public health crisis. And here I present research that we did during the COVID-19 pandemic, funded by the Sustainable Cities and the Urban Environment Research Community of the University of Westminster and the Quentin Hogg Trust, in collaboration with colleagues from Active Travel Academy and Psychology. And it's quite nice to see some of my colleagues here today and also online. So what happened during the pandemic was that temporary initiatives moved from private land to public land, including London's response to the pandemic through temporary street and green space adaptations. And I'm drawing parallels between initiatives with a longer term outlook, such as low traffic neighborhoods, and others with much more temporary approaches, such as temporary street closures and cycle lanes, and also look more closely into parklets as green space replacing parking spots. And that's done through observation in the London Borough of Hackney, but also through focus group data that we collected in 2021 with parklets initiators from across London. What is, overall, what one can conclude from this period is that some of these seemingly temporary public spaces were part of longer term planned strategies, but really took off because of the urgency of the pandemic, which highlights the agency of crisis as a creative agency for urban design to experiment with fast tracking and solutions for urban space. So next slide. In conclusion, through this sort of historical overview, we can see a lineage of temporary creative experiments and solutions for public space bubbling up in periods of crisis. And all of this together form a sort of an interconnected web over time and space that can provide a legacy of lessons learned, small lessons, but important lessons for the future planning and urban design of sustainable and healthy cities. So that's my chapter. Thank you.
Thank you, Crystalia. Next we have Hessam Kamalipur, who is here in person, who's come from the University of Cardiff, where he's a senior lecturer. His research focuses on informal urbanism and explores how urban informality works in a global context. Over to you.
So, hello everyone. It's great to be here, and thank you, Marion and Susie, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here and be part of this great moment, I guess, for urban design as well, as we can see these emerging and also the continuous contributions to the development of the field. So I'm going to particularly talk about my chapter in the book, which, as the title suggests, is about informal urban design. I'm looking at forms of informal settlement. My research particularly looks at the intersections of urban design, informal urbanism, urban morphology, public space, and comparative studies. I'm looking at how forms of informality take place across different places, particularly in a global context. Without further ado, in this chapter, which one? That one. Oh, sorry for that. Great, thank you. Yes, one of the key points in this chapter that I discuss is a discussion of terminology, and it's important to not to confuse the relations between formal and informal with the relations between legal and illegal, because informal activities may or may not be illegal depending on the context, depending on the definition and the boundaries. The other key distinction that we need to talk about is the distinction between forms of informality and what is known as tactical or temporary urbanism, because not all tactical or temporary forms of urbanism can be considered as informal urbanism or a form of informality in city. What is also quite important is that terminology in the discussion of informal urbanism is important because it can directly inform urban design interventions in the future. So words matter, particularly in this case, quite a lot, because they can justify different forms of intervention going ahead or not. So range of terms we may heard of, for example, squatter, slum, informal settlement, and lots of also context-specific terms in this sense. The discussion of informality can be traced back to 1970s, as we all know, to the discussion of informal sector, and broadly is one of the terms that can be hardly accurately defined due to its multiple dimensions and complexities. One of the key definitions of informality that we can somehow broadly agree upon is related to how forms of informality incorporate a range of activities that take place beyond yet in relation to state control. And it may range from informal settlement to street vending to informal transport across different contexts. In this chapter, particularly looked at informal settlement as both a product and a process of shaping places and public spaces. And it's also important to note that, if we can go to the next, please, thank you. Note that when we talk about informal urbanism, we cannot simply think or assume that informality takes place within a vacuum. Inevitably, any discussion of informal urbanism is going to be linked to how informality is related to formality. One of the attempts that we've had over the years, going to a number of years ago, work I've done with Kim Dovey, is looking at the relations between what we know as or can consider as informal settlement and also what we often consider as formal city. One of the key confusions there is that it's important to move beyond making a binary distinction between informality and formality. So what we can see is that on top there, the FF1 and down here, the II, what we call in that typology. And what was quite interesting there is that when we looked at range of different places, 15 cities across the world, ranging from Southeast Asia to South Asia, Middle East, Africa, and South America, we noticed that there isn't that simple dichotomy here between formal and informal. What we really see across different places is a range of in-between conditions where places become informalized or become formalized over time. So in reality, this means that whenever we look at a place, we are actually looking at a mix of formal and informal processes at play. Places become informalized, become formalized, and that process is an unfolding process that one condition becomes another. Yes, please. Thank you. The other thing that I discuss in this chapter is about the relations between different scales. So when we talk about informal settlement as both a process and product, we're going to think about how it works across multiple scale, from a metro scale to the very small scale of about a few meters of a laneway in a settlement. So how the edges work, the public-private interfaces, how inside is connected to outside, and how those differences can make a difference. In this project, I looked at 3 different case studies from a completely different context: Pune in India, Medellin in Colombia, and also Bangkok in Thailand, to see how these differences play out. Both similarities and differences are particularly interesting to look at how functional mix emerges in these settlements at a very small scale. What is important about functional mix is the generative aspect of the functional mix. It's produced through self-organized processes, and how that is related to other morphological dimensions, such as building densities, such as also the access network, and also the public-private interfaces, and at the same time looking at how what we call the loose parts taking place along public spaces, and how those are related to forms of street life, particularly street life intensities in these settlements, how the space matters, and how those scales of analysis work. So one of the key considerations there is the discussion of the shaping of public space. When it comes to informal settlements, we are talking about a provisional public space with a strong sense of communality. And also what is quite interesting here is the ways in which the everyday life spills out to the public space. Public space becomes the arena of negotiation, contestation, everyday appropriations, and forms of temporary appropriations over time. And also that discussion of public space becoming a parochial form of public realm. The other thing that I discuss in the chapter is the discussion of incrementalism and forms of incremental adaptations. Informal settlements are inevitably in the process of continuous transformation and adaptation, much of that taking place through collective and self-organized forms of adaptation over time. One of the discussions that I particularly looked at was to identify increments of change taking place across different contexts, including contexts that have completely different socio-political, socio-cultural dynamics, and also looking at how these spaces become adapted over time, forms of incremental adaptation. And also, more importantly, looking at the urban design governance aspect of how these adaptations work, forms of self-organized governance that looks at what we called informal codes or rules that are at play in the adaptations of these settlements, the rights of light, ventilation, airspace, way, and how those work through self-organized processes. And also what was quite interesting to look at how these forms of functional mix take place over time. Places become adapted and the edges of public space become a fluid edge condition. The public-private interface, the change of activities, opening a shop, closing a shop, changing the place of a shop, that adaptability, that flexibility, and the value of the ground level open space and each centimeter or half a meter that matters in terms of how public space work in these settlements. And also, as the other part of the chapter, I looked at the other aspect of informal settlement, particularly looking at it as a form of process, looking at the morphogenesis of these settlements. These are recent studies. We looked at cases in Africa and looking at how the self-organized process of transformation play out, the production of access network, the production of buildings, and how they are related to each other across different contexts. And next one, please. Yes. And the continuation of that study that I looked at was to explore other examples of how these processes play out, the production, the morphogenesis, the production of a space, and at the same time looking at how different forms of informal settlement play out across different cities. These are 3 different cities in the context of Vietnam. In a recent study, we've been looking at how the production of access network and buildings play out over a longer period of time, and how these generative processes of what we sometimes discuss in the shared body of knowledge in urban design as a generative theories, or that emerging discussion which take place in part of the informal settlement as a process. Thank you. And a key part of the work, I also looked at the dynamics of visibility. So that expressive dimension of informal settlement, that forms of expression, and also particularly looking at the spatial visibility, how these settlements become invisible, and when they become visible, what kind of visibility is produced and what would be the potential impact. So that may range from street view visibility to public overview to private overview that is exclusive to certain groups of community, and how those different forms of visibility is going to be related to interventions and transformation of place over time, how these activities and forms of spatial visibility is going to impact throughout the process of place transformation, both formally and informally. And yes, so putting these all together, range of discussions that we can think about as a conclusion. One of them is related to how the discussion of informal urbanism in general, and also informal settlement in particular, can help us deterritorialize the existing body of knowledge in urban design, particularly moving beyond cities of the global north, although it's also important to note that forms of informality are not necessarily limited to cities of the global south. So that kind of discussion, and also what can be learned from informal process of place production, and also the shaping of place and public space through self and collectively organized processes, and at the same time what urban design can do and what would be the scope and limitations of urban design when it comes to transformation of these places. And also important to note that the discussion of the relations between formal and informal is going to link us, link to another interesting discussion, that when it comes to place transformation in these settlements, usually we need to think about the intersections of these 2 processes. What kind of solutions can work with the intersections of informal and formal processes, until when we need to think about the fixation of the final form and enabling flexibility and adaptations, thinking about the time that designer leaves, what's going to happen, what is the space of possibility for adaptation, and all the discussions. How can we enable, in the context of urban design literature, to open up the space of possibility for generative forms of intervention that allow for adaptability over time. And also looking at the end of the chapter into the discussion of urban design education, to what extent the conventional urban design education, or what we know as the discussion of urban design education, is actually and is going to effectively prepare the future generation of urban designers to be able, well equipped to intervene and also engage with the challenge of transforming informal settlements, and to what extent our urban design education is preparing that and enabling those discussions. Yeah, I think that's a kind of brief overview of the chapter. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Yes, Sam, that was great. Lovely, lovely slides. But the next contribution is a video, because it's it's from Elek Pafka and Kim Davey, who are based at the University of Melbourne in Australia. that there's a strong link to Hesam's presentation in that Hesam studied with Kim Dovey and has done collaborative work. So the theme of urban mapping continues. So the theme of their chapter is focusing on urban assemblages and morphological capacities. Okay.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting us to contribute to this book, which we hope to be groundbreaking in urban design research. I am Alec Pavka, researcher and senior lecturer in urban planning and urban design at the University of Melbourne.
And I'm Kim Dovey. I'm Professor of Architecture and Urban Design here at the University of Melbourne. And want to thank Marion and Susie so much for putting this book together. Urban design research has been expanding rapidly across the globe, and this is going to be a great contribution.
In our chapter, we present examples of a relational approach to mapping, urban assemblages, and morphological capacities based on our collaborations over a decade. We show multi-scalar relations through a relational approach to understand cities as a means of mapping at multiple scales and then critiquing the relations between scales. Three common scales are the metropolitan, walkable neighborhood, and the street.
When we get down onto the sidewalks, we have had a long-standing focus on interfaces and interface types, where the public-private interface, you'd all know, has been a key focus in urban design theory since Jane Jacobson. We've developed a means of mapping and understanding the mix of interface types. And we've also expanded this to look at what we call interface catchments, a mapping method that enables us to understand the relations between walkable catchments and the extent of public-private interfaces. Here we're contrasting the smaller blocks of Madrid with the elongated blocks of Houston.
We also show a new method of mapping entry constellations, where the entries to buildings are color-coded by function as a means of expressing the relations between access and functional mix. The various colors represent live, work, visit, public transport, and spectacle, and the sizes indicate the relative volume of pedestrian using this. In this example, we show three parts of London, central part in West End, a gentrifying creative cluster, and the neoliberal development.
We've also been interested in trying to map what is often called the publicness of public space, which is too complex to map on a single continuum. And here we suggest how it might be mapped according to complex relations between ownership and access, with categories including ticketed space and invitation space, among others.
When we mapped functional mix, we explored the relations between mix and walkability by mapping the ways in which functions mix at the cadastral level and how they are available within walkable distance. Primary colors indicate monofunctionality, whereas lighter colors indicate a higher degree of mix.
We've also been interested in mapping transit isochrones, the maps of how far we can get by different modes. And these are maps that have been around for over a century, but they've not been combined and compared with where driving, walking, cycling, and public transport are compared with each other. So these maps compare these different modes and show how each would change with key urban design decisions, and indeed, what might it take to get people out of their cars. And the last of these approaches has been around informal settlements and trying to understand the morphogenic process where streets and buildings often co-evolve in complex ways. This morphogenic mapping becomes a crucial part of understanding how designers might engage with the future of such settlements.
So thank you very much for inviting us to this book launch where we can't be present. It's a different time zone here, and we pre-recorded this.
We want to publish the video, okay, for the people online.
Well, thank you to Kim and Alec in their absence. We're now going to move to the Q&A session, and we're going to come up the front. We didn't want to block the screen earlier. Yeah, Hesam, come up too. well, so, questions, please. Comments.
And there can be questions online if anybody online wants to question.
Okay, Matthew.
Thank you very much for the lovely presentations. So the book is called, I'm just trying to read from the floor there, Research Approaches in Urban Design. Research Handbook in Urban Design. I couldn't read it. I need to put glasses on. So the emphasis on research, I wonder whether it deals with research methodologies in urban design and the range of research methodologies. Is that one of the underpinning factors that led to the choice of chapters, or is that more about the sort of coverage of the urban design field?
Hello. Yeah, we were aware that is it you who did Hassan has an entire book about urban design methodologies, which you're very welcome to explain here. So I didn't want to compete. We didn't want to compete. But on the other hand, we did want to try and illustrate a range of methodologies. So it was very good having Kim and Alex's chapter. Also, I think Shruti's draws on morphological approaches to urban design. We have other more sociological methods and methodologies. And some of the chapters, actually, because people are reviewing and reflecting on, you know, a whole number of different projects and drawing out lessons from them. I'm thinking of Tim Townsend's chapter on health. They do cover different aspects of methodologies, of methods, I'd say.
Yes. Yes, so I think you mentioned a great point, because the way I also noticed that is that both books came approximately around the same time. So ours came, I think, in August 2023. Yours published in January 2024, but the focuses were different, and I think that's what it makes it quite interesting for the development of the field. Because, for example, in our work, we had that particular focus on covering range of methodologies, different research methods, whereas I notice the structure of the Research Handbook for Urban Design, which is your work, is looking also at that very interesting distinction between different spatial scales, which is something very different and very unique to the book. So, but we structured ours based on themes, and then tried to cover a range of methodologies related to different research themes, such as, you know, the idea of agency, affordance, informality, performance, and so on. So that I think those differences complement in a way each other, and that's really interesting. Yeah.
Okay, who else would like to ask a question or make a comment?
Thank you. To Marion and Susie, what were the main challenges you found in creating the book?
First of all, finding the contributors, because you know, that's I think it's quite a lot to ask people to write a fairly, you know, an original chapter, because it couldn't be a reproduction of work they'd done before. And, you know, they have pressures of, for some younger researchers or emergent researchers, they have the pressures of in Britain, of the Research Excellence Framework, where they're expected to produce, you know, refereed articles, peer-reviewed, etc. And book chapters, certainly in the planning field, tend not to be so highly regarded. So some of the emergent researchers were saying, well, no, I just can't do this. They also have the pressure of getting money in. And one person we asked said, no, I've got to raise some funds, you know, and I can't possibly think of writing a book chapter. And other people like Matthew, who we invited, was simply too busy.
I think one of the big challenges was getting good geographic coverage, actually. And I mean, we've partially achieved our objectives in terms of getting good geographic coverage, but there are also some themes that we're very aware that aren't there. And that was, I mean, it's getting people to deliver. Partly is that some people who got diverted and didn't deliver to the deadline. So we're very aware of some gaps. And there are also kind of major themes of interest to Marion and me that are missing, unfortunately. It's not a thing, I'll admit our mistakes. There's no, or gaps, but there's nothing on gender, and there's nothing on, well, there's some on climate change, but we would have liked more on climate change, and hope that that will be a big area of future research. So, questions, comments?
I actually have one more question, sorry.
Okay.
Just a quick one.
Microphone.
Are all the contributors from academic backgrounds?
They have all got academic qualifications, but Jason, for example, Jason Pomeroy is in practice, and he runs his own academy in Singapore. And so does his own urban design and architectural tuition from that. Others have, yeah, I mean, most are academics. And I think all of the leading contributors have completed doctoral research. They needed to have, you know, to being included as researchers, they needed to have done research, basically. So that does cut down on how many, you know, where you can find people. We found particular challenges in finding contributors from Latin America. We really want, and I'm aware now, thinking about it, we haven't got, we didn't have a contribution from the Middle East in the end. But we did try and reach out to the different continents, and also to try and get researchers who were based in those regions. So it wasn't that they were in a sort of prestigious North American university and writing about that region, that they were based in it. I felt was quite important in terms of developing the discipline. Oh, yes. Thank you.
Hi. Congratulations. Hi, Marianne. Nice to see you again virtually. Congratulations on this important collection. I've actually been enjoying going through my copy, and I enjoyed listening to the presentations today, except the video, I couldn't hear anything. I guess you partly answered my question. First, actually, before I ask, I apologize if I was one of the people who aborted my efforts halfway through due to being torn apart across many other responsibilities. But my question was partly answered. If you were to do this again, what would you do differently? What would what would you advise someone who is about, for example, considering to embark on this effort? What advice and insights looking back would you be able to offer? And thank you again.
Well, thanks very much for your for coming online, Luna. From my point of view, I think I would feel less shy about approaching contributors. I was very, Susie was very good pushing us. And I think I would actually have invited more with the anticipation that some people wouldn't be able to complete for unforeseen circumstances. We did have the pandemic, which didn't help. Part of, it started just, in fact, you signed the contract during the pandemic. Yes, yeah, but there are always pressures, there are always crises. Do you want to say?
I agree. I think that probably asking more people at the outset so that you're allowing for some people to drop out is a good idea. But I think also trying to work out what areas are emerging is probably important as well, so that you're ahead of the curve.
Yeah, we did try and do that. And I guess there's always a bias towards one's own particular kind of standpoint, that I'm more interested in the social side of urban design, and also a kind of bottom up, if you like, view from the underdog. I guess probably if I were to do it again, I might think about inviting more architecturally inclined, that aspect of the more formal aspect of urban design.
Should we go to another question? I think it has been answered, your question. Anybody else want to come in?
Oh, Matthew again. Is it because you're doing a volume at the moment?
No, I'm just curious. Now you've got to the end of the project. What would you say are the hot urban design topics and issues that we need to be dealing with in the future? What's come out of the book that you think is sort of, I think, Marion, you referred right at the beginning to the cross-cutting themes. What were those? And what are the big issues?
Well, one of the issues, I talk about it in the conclusion, the issues of culture and language, and the kind of different terminologies are important. In some of the chapters we're looking at and saying, what's this? What does a greenway? What is a greenway? What does it is? And looking at the significance of cultural influences on urban design, I think hasn't been explored. I would put a pitch for the urban night, the influence of time and, time through the year, through the seasons. Trying to think. I think this theme of informality, the urban, I think, as Hassan was explaining, urban design's been very much dominated by studying historical forms from the Anglophone countries, really. And we need to focus a lot more on generally the global south, the processes going on in those countries and those kind of interactions. We do cover that, but there's just such enormous numbers of research questions that come out of that. And also advancing methods, which you've highlighted. The mapping is coming through, but there are whole, I think, connecting up sociology, if you like, and more formal aspects of urban design could really be explored in a much more rigorous way.
Just add a few little points. I think technology really and its impact, I mean, the smart city is an issue, but I think for me the biggest issue is climate change and how the challenge of climate change, how we're adapting to it, what its impacts are. I think that's the big issue, and I would have liked to have included more, but I mean, I think there isn't that much work at the moment. Luna is is working on it, and has also written a very good review article, which we refer to in the book. So I think that's a priority for researchers, because that's the biggest crisis we face. Shall we wrap up there, or is there any burning questions to come? Did you want to ask a question? You can ask off. We're here to talk afterwards, and there's refreshments to be had. So thank you all very much for coming, and thanks again to our sponsors, the Urban Design Group and the Territories. Emerging Territories, sorry, I got it wrong. Emerging Territories Research Group at University of Westminster. And thanks to all our contributors as well.